Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Clallam EDC Coffee with Colleen chat. With the only exception, Colleen is on vacation this week, so it's Coffee with Mitch today. So thank you for joining us. Today we're really excited to have Chastain, the EOC coordinator for Clallam County Emergency Management, here to join us. So we are going to go through some awesome slides that she brought for us, and just gives us an overview of what her department does and how it can help not only the business community but just the general public. Just a couple housekeeping items before we start. If everyone could remain on mute until you have a question. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll call on you, or put it in the chat and I'll go ahead and ask Anne from there. But besides that, without further ado, kick it away, Anne. Thanks for coming on.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Hold on here. Okay, is that showing up? I can't see what you see.
Yes.
All righty. Let's start this.
And if you could put that in presentation, there you go.
There we go.
Perfect.
Yep, just too many buttons to click. Alrighty, so I'm going to talk about kind of what we do here in emergency management and how that relates to businesses within the county. This is my contact information. Emergency management is a division of the Clallam County Sheriff's Office, and we operate under their authority. So what is emergency management? We have 5 areas of responsibility: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Some of those have some overlap. Our job is to try and prevent bad things from happening, or if they do happen, to make them less. Mitigation, trying to take actions that we can that will make the effects of disasters less. Preparedness, and that is teaching people how to take care of themselves, and to get them prepared so they know what hazards are out there, they know when they might hit, and they know what actions that they can take to make them better. Now, response is on there because we are involved in the response actions, but our job is primarily support. Emergency management does not go, well, no, we have gone house to house, but we're not out there at the, providing immediate care. We're not the firefighters, we're not the cops. We're not going to be coming to your house to make sure you're okay. So we tend to stay in the Emergency Operations Center, or EOC as we call it, and provide support to those people. We get them more boots on the ground if they're needed. We get them resources if we have to bring in resources from other areas of the state or even out of state. And then the longest piece of every single incident that we respond to is the recovery phase. Just by way of perspective, we had the flooding in 2021 that primarily hit our west end. We just closed the recovery on that about 8 months ago. So the recovery piece we're dealing with government agencies, so that can take a long time. So during an incident, we're coordinating with FEMA and the state for, like I said, that the resources and support that the agencies who are doing the actual response. What we look at, what makes it a quote disaster, is that the resources that are needed for the event outstrip what we have here present in the county. And at that point, we will issue a disaster declaration that's done through the county board. And at that point, we start looking outside of the county for help. National Guard, American Red Cross, Department of Ecology, and then another big piece of our response is what we call COADs, Community Agencies Active in Disaster. And Justine, my coworker, is in the process of creating a COAD committee here within the county so that when an incident happens, we know what community agencies are out there that we can call in and use their expertise. A good example of this was, again, during the floods, where we used United Way, we used OLICAP, we also used Team Rubicon, the Conservation Corps, United Way was involved. And what happens is those agencies have expertise. They know their communities, they know the residents, they know their members, they know their clients. And for us to come in and try and set up some kind of a system to be able to deal with these different groups is really counterproductive when there is already some group out there that has that framework. So what we try to do is get all of those connections made way ahead of the disaster. Make sure we know each other's faces. We have had conversations. We kind of get to know the personalities. It just makes it so much easier when we reach out. If I'm calling and I'm asking Bob for help instead of trying to find the director of the agency in charge of, it's just so much more effective process when we know each other and I know what the capabilities are of those different agencies. So I'm not calling wasting time trying to get the wrong agency to do what I need to be done.
Right.
It's a nice understanding of what everybody's capabilities are. So
Awesome.
once the incident is over, once the actual response is over, we file all the declarations that we have to have. So the county commissioners can file a declaration of emergency for within the county. At that point, it moves up to the state. Now, if it is a localized disaster where it just hit, the Clallam County, all the damage that happened, like a big plane crash or a hazmat spill or something like that, then that is, we have to reach a certain threshold. Now, most of the times that we have been involved in the larger state or federal disaster claims, that's because the damage has not been localized just to us. We're a small county, relatively speaking. During the floods, we were able to get that assistance because we were combined. The whole incident was combined with the flooding that was happening in Whatcom, Skagit, and Snohomish County. So they had some really extensive damage. So, so the way that's determined is its dollar amount. Right after the incident, I send out emails to all of the public agencies, the firefighters, the public works, the law enforcement, pretty much every PUD. So I send out emails to this rather extensive list and I ask them, what are your damages? And a big power outage, some of the damages that go into that document are things like the overtime spent for those line crews that are out trying to get the power going. Now, in that instance, it's only overtime that qualifies because the rest of it is just their normal cost of doing business. There are certain exceptions to that, like debris removal. We can use straight time because you're not removing debris unless there's an incident, so it's directly related to the incident itself. And there's a rather thick document called the Papa G that we use to determine what category the expense is in and how to total it up and what percentage and if FEMA is going to allow it. So our threshold here in Clallam County is $354,913. So from all of these agencies in the county, the total amount of unreimbursed, reimbursable costs has to total that $354,000.
It's an exact number.
Yeah, it's a percentage. They've got a way of calculating what that is. And then so we have to have at least that much of damage. So we do what we call a preliminary damage assessment where everybody is doing it. We have to have that information into state within 30 days of the incident itself. Now it gets tricky. So we had an incident in early January. And it was based on National Weather Service declaration of severe weather. So once we have that, the Weather Service says the severe weather happened, then we look at what happened during that time. And the city of Port Angeles had some damage that started in one incident of extreme weather and then manifested in the second one. So they were actually able to get, because we had that damage that went from one incident into the other. It was the water main break on Lincoln Street. So since the storm damage, which caused the leak, happened during one period, and then the sinkhole happened during the second period, we were able to use that to bring those two incidents together, which made it easier for the state to meet their requirement, which is roughly $13 million. So from all the different counties, they have to get together $13 million. So if that damage were just localized to Clallam County, we would have to have, if we were going to push it up to state and have state file for a federal declaration on our behalf, we would have to have $13 million just within that incident to be able to submit for that. And then that declaration goes to FEMA, and that requires a presidential signature and a presidential declaration of emergency. So once we reach our threshold, our initial 350,000, then it goes up to state, and then state sends it up to FEMA, and then FEMA makes that declaration of a federal emergency. We will have no FEMA response if we do not meet that criteria and if the president doesn't sign the declaration of emergency. And it can take some time. Yesterday, we finally got the presidential declaration of emergency that came from that January event. So the good news is that Port Angeles is going to get some assistance with the damage, some reimbursement for the damage on Lincoln Street, also the damage that happened to the Olympic Discovery Trail. PUD is also going to get some reimbursement for some of their overtime during that situation. And there were a couple of other, more minor expenses, but usually there is one agency that will meet our entire threshold if there is significant damage. So then we coordinate. In the meantime, before the federal declaration, we're coordinating with all the state agencies. We can bring crews in if the what we have here isn't sufficient, to kind of help clear things up. During the floods in 2021, we did quite a bit of that. We had a group called Team Rubicon come in and did what is termed in the industry a muck and gut. So when a house is flooded, the sheetrock and the flooring and stuff like that becomes saturated with water. Then you have a damp environment. Mold is likely to grow. So they come in and take all the muck out, and scrape all the mud and on all the dissolved sheetrock and everything else. They scrape all of that out of the house, and then they bring everything from the flood line down back to the studs. So that
Muck and gut.
muck
Makes
and gut.
sense. Okay.
So we had groups come in and did quite a bit of that out on the West End during that flooding incident.
Do you know off the top of your head about how many homes were affected in that flooding incident?
Yeah, we had there were 40 or 50 homes that were affected.
Wow. Wow.
And there was something also that was unusual for that particular event. So there's two levels of assistance that we can get. And one of them is public assistance, which is the part that I have generally been the one coordinating. And then the other is individual assistance. So I work with PUD and the roads department and law enforcement and fire departments to see what public event resources were being used for this event. And then my coworker Justine works on how this affected individual homes. So it is very rare to get federal individual assistance granted as part of your declaration of emergency. For the storms that we had in January of this year, we are just starting that process now to see whether or not homes were damaged. And again, it's the federal government. It's a little tricky. If your roof starts leaking because there's a big rainstorm, FEMA is going to come in and they're going to look at that. And if you've got 20 years of deferred maintenance on your home, they're going to say that the leak was as a result of the deferred maintenance, not because of the storm. The storm just pointed out the damage that was already there. They have some fairly strict criteria. It needs to be significant damage to your home in order to qualify for individual assistance. So the muck and guts that we had done during the 21 flooding, that there were a lot of homes that were extensively damaged. I mean, when you've got a foot of muddy silt in your house, that adds up fairly quickly. So we did get individual assistance at that time, federal individual assistance, which is why it took so long, which is why we took so long to close that case out. What happens with that is we are required then to follow all of those individual homes and those people who are affected for at over a year after the event to make sure that they are, not suffering, as a direct result of the flooding.
Wow. It's a lot to track.
It is. And it's interesting because there needs to be a case manager who reviews all of those individual cases. And technically it's not supposed to be us. So we have to contract with someone, one of the agencies that can provide those. We ended up going through OLICAP. And using an employee from there to perform the case management, and we were able to get funds to pay for that person's time. In other counties, they use things like Salvation Army or other existing, case management systems that are already in place. And then that goes back to those COADs that I talked about earlier, those community organizations active in disaster, because they already know case management. They have a system for doing that. They have people who are trained. So we want to be able to turf that back to them. So one of the things that has happened legislatively in the state as a result of those floods in 2021 was, so the state realized that during those floods, there was an absolute need for individual assistance. There was some of the damage. I mean, ours, we had some damage, but when you look at the scale of the event, our damage was relatively minor. We had a small number of people who had some fairly significant damage. But when you look at what happened over in Whatcom County, where they had a 150 unit low income housing development that was destroyed by flooding in their neighborhoods. So our 40-50 homes kind of starts to pale by comparison. Our job is to try and get things back to normal. Now, in the aftermath of something like a Cascadia level event, our normal is going to be a whole new normal. So what we're trying to do is make sure, so we're given there's a system called the community lifelines, and it just breaks down what keeps our community whole. Whether or not is law enforcement intact? Do we have officers that are able to respond to calls to provide security? Is the food chain intact? Are people able to get meals? Do they have water and meals? Do they have sanitation? Is there appropriate support infrastructure, or has, say, the stormwater systems have collapsed, or people's septic tanks overflowing? We also look at things like our ability to communicate. So there's 12, 13 of these different headings, and our job is to restore those back to functional. Now, functional may not be fixed. It may take a long time to get things permanently fixed, but what we want to do is be able to restore the functionality. And at that point, we let the state know that that particular community lifeline has gone back to green. So the state found during those floods that in order to help those individual people, they needed to spend money. And just like us here at the county, you can't spend money that you don't have a budget line for. So when we have a disaster, a localized incident, then the county commissioners get together and they decide, they kind of make a determination of, what this is going to cost us. And they'll assign us a budget line that we can operate through. And then what happens is we spend that money, and then we reimburse it from state or federal funds if those become available. So the state had a category known as individual assistance, but they had not funded it. And we had not had, the last time we had an incident that required individual assistance was the big Oso landslide. So the state had not funded that budget line in a number of years. It'd been over 10, I think it's 10, 15 years since they'd had to fund that. So the state has now gone to the legislature, and individual assistance is something that is going to remain a funded budget line. But then again, it's only something that's used if there is that declaration of emergency.
Got it.
Okay, get on to the next one. So days like today, and actually today is a blue sky day. We call these blue sky days when there is no disaster happening. We do not have, we're not in response, we're not in recovery. We're basically at this point doing some paperwork from those incidents in January. We're collecting some information to see if individual assistance is going to be required, but we're not, that's not a full-time job. So at that point, we work on those other facets of our mission. So prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. And that's where our county is sitting right now in our mission. So under the mitigation point, I'm throwing a QR code up there. That is to a survey. Everybody, please, pull out your phone, check the QR code. It's a short survey. This is part of the hazard mitigation process. So every 5 years, Clallam County puts together a multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. We have a number of the tribes that come in with us on that plan and adopt that plan. The PUD, some of the local fire jurisdictions, the several different agencies and the county all come in on it. And what this plan does is it sits down and looks at what are things that might happen here. What are the hazards that we face? And then they rank them by 2 criteria: the severity of the incident and the frequency of the incident. So by those criteria, our biggest incident is extreme weather, because those happen a lot. And we generally, in that unreimbursed expenses, we generally hit close to $1 million of expense from each of those incidents. So while everybody is, concerned about, as we should be with Cascadia, Cascadia happens once every, several hundred years. So it's not, while the devastation is associated with that is going to be huge, it is a low frequency event. Then we look at things like wildfires. Wildfires is our big concern right now. Our wildfire season is starting earlier and earlier every year. We had our first wildfire in Clallam County the end of June last year. And our fire season typically does not start until August. A lot of that is just based on less rainfall and higher temps. We also have a lot more people living in what we call the WUI, the wilderness urban interface, which is that area where the woods start hitting the cities, and people are moving to that area, and there's a lot more population out there. So we take a look at all of those hazards, and one of the biggest tools that we have to be able to determine how we rank those hazards is that QR code. We want to hear from the public. We want to hear from everybody in the county. FEMA came up with a term, probably 7 years ago, called whole community, where they no longer want, the experts sitting in our offices making these decisions, that there is information out there, and we need to get that information from a lot of people, because we don't know. We can take the information and review it, but if the information that we get is limited, or it's based on where we go looking for facts and figures to back us up, then we don't truly get the whole picture. So we want everybody to have input. Now, when you open it up to everybody getting input, sometimes it gets let's just say interesting. There are some people who, believe different things and believe them rather strongly. So we don't, just automatically, because somebody put something in, validate that as a big concern, because it really bothers one person. What we're looking at is to see what kind of trends, what are the things that most people in this area are concerned about. We have a contractor that is developing this plan for us. And we're just doing a revision on our previous plan. And just for a little bit of perspective, so we did our last plan in 2019. We had a great contractor who came in and did an amazing job at identifying all of our risks and hazards and ranking them. And the plan is on our website if you want to take a look at it. Personally, I'd wait, because we're doing the new one, and there's going to be some changes to it. But in that particular ranking that we did, and we had this approved in November of 2019, pandemic ranked as a 3% chance of happening. And then just a few months later, we started pandemic response that we were in for almost 3 years. So they aren't perfect. We don't always know. And what we're looking at is probabilities.
Looks like the plan's quite thorough too. I mean, it's over 1,100 pages.
Yeah,
So
it's not a sit down on the couch and read
not a
on
light read.
Saturday. Yeah, it is a reference document. And part of that plan too is to go to this is the link for the other one was the link to the
Survey.
plan. This is the link to the survey. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So part of that, it's more of a reference where we want to be able to go in and look at it. And within that, there is, probably 4 or 5 pages, I think, that are a list of projects that the county put forward as projects that we wanted to accomplish under this. And there are certain grant programs and federal funding that requires that you be part, if your agency is going to provide for some of these federal funds, one of their requirements is that you have to be signed on or have either your own internal hazard mitigation plan, or you have to be signed on and a part of one of these multi-jurisdictional plans like the one that we have here in the county. This was became of importance here in the county because we had our schools. There was a lot of work that was done on school seismic safety, and schools were allowed to apply for BRIC grants to be able to do some seismic retrofitting. And the state legislature put some money aside for school seismic safety. But in order to qualify for any of those funds, the schools had to have a hazard mitigation plan. So we did a lot of scrambling to make sure, and I believe every school district within the county right now has an existing hazard mitigation plan. A couple of them already had it. PA, SQUIM already had it. I think Quileute Valley School District did. And then the Clallam Bay and Crescent did not. So we got those last two up and running and assisted them in getting their plans done. But yeah, please go there, fill out the survey, and it really truly helps us get the information that we need to do the plan fairly. Okay, so if a disaster happens, these are some of the ones that we've had. We had the winter storms in 24, floods and landslides in 21, the pandemic. We also had Snowmageddon in 2018. So we do have these disasters here on a fairly regular basis. So what I want to look at is how, when those disaster happens, what are the impacts to the business community? So these are just some facts and figures that I pulled. Okay, I Googled them. That talk about what the impact of small business is within our community. I mean, it is 99% of the employments, 50% of all private sector workers, 45% of the nation's payroll. But the most important one is that one at the end, and that is that small business are the goods and services that we need in order to recover. If our businesses are not there, if we can't go down the road and get a cup of coffee, if we can't, remember during pandemic, if you can't get toilet paper, if you can't, if you go into Safeway and there's 2 red peppers and a couple of onions on the shelf and nothing else, this impacts the ability of the community to recover. And when those kinds of detriments happen, a lot of people will leave a community if they don't have real strong ties to it. These are some scary figures. 40% of small businesses closed by disasters never reopen. So if you have someone who is an older business owner and they're looking at potentially retiring in the next 5 to 6 years, and you get a whack like that where your business is unable to operate, you are most likely going to pull that trigger a little faster and not open back up. Or if you are a small struggling business owner, that may be that impetus that says, well, if I go and get a job with somebody else who pays my health insurance and gives me a retirement, that might be a better use of my time. 25% of those that do reopen fail within a year, because sometimes with small business, they are often small profit margin. They have a very narrow profit margin that they're working within. And some of this is just too much of a hit that they just cannot recover from. The businesses that do recover did so because they had a plan. And planning, I know planning is a big part of my job, and I have a whole list over there of plans that I need to finish working on. And planning is one of those things you do in your downtime. And as a small business owner, sometimes that time just is not there. So especially for the small business owners, there is a lot of assistance to help you create those plans. And we have a source for that assistance. Continuity of operations planning, or COOP. It's also called a BCP, or a business continuity plan. And this is basically figuring out what is the bare minimum that you need to keep your business running. It just gives you a path to figure out what do you need, and then again, how do you get it when things are tough, or a disaster has happened. So you need your product or service, whatever it is. You need to be able to have that. You need to be able to provide it. You need to be able to make it, create it. And then you need a way to get your product to the clients, or get the customers or clients to come into you. And then you need to identify who do you need to make that happen. Very often we're not doing all the work ourselves. We have employees that are helping to do that. Are they going to be able to get into work? Can they come in and help you? What is the bare minimum number of employees that you need in order to do that? And then the whole reason people are in business, how do you get or process payments? Are you doing that electronically? Are you doing that through a point of sale system that requires you to have internet and have electricity? And what happens when those go down? And that was one of the big issues during the 2018 snowstorms, was there were only 2 gas stations in the entire county that were able to both pump the gas and process payments. So because they had generator backup for those systems. So that created big long lines at the gas stations. And so how much of this can you do with no power, no roads, and no internet? Because those are the systems that go down during those events. Okay, so this, again, I love those little QR codes. This is the Ready Business Toolkit. This helps you to identify what the risks are and develop your plan. It is a FEMA-sponsored program. If there is enough interest, we can actually bring an instructor in to conduct the training. But most of it is also available online. And I know it's difficult if you're a fairly small mom and pop type shop. It's difficult for you to just close the business down and come in and attend a training for a couple of days. Whereas this is a way to get that information for you directly. And you can do it on your own time. Okay, so every disaster begins with you. I don't mean you're causing the disaster. It's just that every disaster is personal. The first thing that happens is you feel the shaking. You notice the snow is falling. You can't get to the grocery store. You notice that you don't have enough food in your house because you were going to go grocery shopping tomorrow. So there are ways to help at that base core of every single disaster. And number one is personal preparedness. And preparedness does not mean that you're wearing camo and building a bunker in your basement and raising meat rabbits and, becoming completely self-sufficient. I mean, yeah, that's a choice. And I'm probably a little more in that direction than most people. But it can be much simpler. If you and your employees do not have preparedness at home, they're not going to leave their home to come into work for you. So being able to encourage your workforce to be able to be prepared enables them to keep their head in the game at work, and allow your work to do what they can to help rebuild the whole community. So if you could please work on encouraging preparedness with your employees. We here at Emergency Management, we have dog and pony shows that we can bring in free of charge, that we can present to your employees, that can show them how to stay prepared as a workplace, how to stay prepared as family, how to stay prepared as a neighborhood. We also have programs. We have the CERT class, which is a neighborhood team that does response right after an incident. They're given some skills. They're not, like basic first aid and how to assess whether or not a building is damaged or too badly to go in, how to search for victims, things like that. We also have on the county website a program called Prepare in a Year that breaks the whole preparedness program down into 12 easy projects. Projects take about an hour apiece, and they are easy things you can do cheap with your family in about an hour. And then we also have the Clallam Ready Neighborhood Preparedness Program. So this used to be called Map Your Neighborhood. Map Your Neighborhood is a copyrighted program, and the woman who owns the copyright is getting elderly and she no longer wants to support the program. So we've basically created a new program on how to be prepared as a neighborhood. Very simple, simple tasks to do. And we can bring any of those to either your neighborhood or your workplace. The smallest one I think I've ever done was 5 people. And we've done them in groups of up to 60. So we can scale the program to whatever your needs are, but we'd love to come out and do that. And like I said, this is the blue sky times. So this is when we want to be able to push that preparedness message. So, also, in order to getting prepared and taking advantage of our programs, is to attend local preparedness events. We have programs, we bring in instructors and sponsor programs that kind of give out information on what the various threats are and what preparedness is going to look like for you. Now, this is my shameless plug. This is one of those local preparedness events. We are doing presentations throughout the county right now on wildfire. I'm bringing in a presentation from the National Weather Service is talking about what our fire outlook is out for the summer. DNR, local fire districts, we bring them in to talk about who handles what part of a response. Emergency management talks about alert and warning. How do you get your public alerts? How do you get your information about a disaster? Forest Service, we have a lot of Forest Service land up in here, and how they interact with DNR and the local fire departments, and the American Red Cross, who handles sheltering after a catastrophic fire. So these are the dates. It's basically every Saturday in May. There is a program happening here in the county. First one's in Forks, then CQ. We're having one here in Port Angeles at the commissioner's room upstairs. And then on May 25th, we're having one in Sequim at the Guy Cole Center. Those are all at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then after our presentations, we open up to the floor for question and answer. So if there's anything that you do not understand or you are unclear on regarding the process of our wildfire response, this is the time and the place to come get that information. And if you need to reach us, there's my email, also the email of my coworker. And even though I'm doing this presentation and telling you to call me, I put Justine up there because 31st of May is my last day in this position. I am retiring. I'm going to go home and work in my garden. So
Congrats. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
How long have you been in this role?
I've been in this role 6 years. I've been with the sheriff's department for 12.
Wow.
And then prior to that, I was a volunteer with search and rescue and local fire and EMS, and then ran a small business. I ran a bookkeeping and accounting service.
Oh, perfect. Right up our alley. That's really interesting. I was curious how someone gets into emergency management. So that makes sense. Great presentation. The slides were great. I had a bunch of questions that you just organically answered. So great job through and through. I did have a question. I know we live in a very unique area, and one of the things that make us unique is our 2-lane highway that isolates us slightly from kind of the rest of the state and the rest of the country, especially on the west end. What do we do? Like, how do you prepare for something like that when that's one of our few ways in and out to the peninsula?
Yeah, that is our biggest concern is the fragility of our roads. And we have a lot of conversations with WashDOT.
Okay.
And quite frankly, a lot of that is based on our geology. When we had the landslides between Clallam Bay and CQ, that
Hmm.
basically just completely isolated those two communities from each other. We put in a 1.5 mile detour around that slide. That involved getting MOUs with 7 different landowners in 1.5 miles. So it's complicated.
Right.
Part of the stuff that WashDOT is doing right now, they have the project going with the 101 bridge over the Elwha, where they're replacing that bridge. It is going to be much more seismically stable. There is not a standard for a 9.0. Okay, they do not have that. They don't know what will survive a 9.0. But the latest information that we're getting from the USGS is they are not expecting our next Cascadia level quake to be a 9.0. They said that those 9.0 quakes tend to happen on 1,000-year intervals rather than that 300 to 500. So they're saying now that probably what we're looking at is more in the realm of an 8, which again is going to create a certain amount of damage. But it's not going to be that total catastrophic 9.0. It's damage we can get past and damage we can repair. They're also thinking their modeling right now is showing that the more likely start of the rupture, which they originally were thinking was going to happen off of Neah Bay, is probably going to be more down into central or southern Oregon.
Hmm.
So that means by the time it gets up here, what may be an 8.6 or something down there, by the time it gets up here, maybe a 7.8 to an 8. So that's reassuring news.
Yeah.
Of course, that's us looking at modeling and math and science and figuring out what it might be. And we use that to put pandemic at 3%. So we always, we're not cheerful people in emergency management. We're not fun at parties. We tend to look at things from a worst case scenario.
That's awesome. I mean, is there any key takeaways from the pandemic? I mean, I'm sure there was a lot, but anything you can
You, I,
point your
I'll
finger
tell
at?
you, I'll tell you what my personal takeaway from that event was an incredible sense of pride in my community. We had over 120 volunteers. These are people who just walked in and said, "Hi, what do you need and how can I help?" We could not have done those vaccine clinics at vaccinating 900 people a day without those volunteers. We had people sewing masks, we had people sewing gowns, we had people that were taking food and doing shopping for people who were on quarantine and isolation. I mean, it was truly, truly humbling. I had 2 volunteers show up that are still volunteers in my EOC. And they were retired full bird colonels from the Air Force who used to work in the Pentagon. And absolutely amazing. I just
Wow.
to have those kinds of and that's just one example of the number of people that we had that came forward and just said, "Hey, these are my skills. What do you want me to do? How can I make this better?" So that reassured me that regardless of what differences of opinion we have here, there, and everywhere on a myriad of subjects, when it comes to the survivability of our community, people come together and they help. And we can always find a way to utilize whatever skill anybody has. So if anyone here is looking for a volunteer position, you can come work with me in the EOC team. And that is a position I'm going to, like Ron Cameron, who used to be our emergency manager. He retired last December. He is now a volunteer in our EOC team. So I've already filled out my volunteer application. So the day I retire, I become a volunteer.
That's awesome. Well, we have a few questions or a few comments in the chat, and it looks like Jim has a question as well. Cindy Kelly said, congrats and enjoy retirement. It's fabulous. Lori said, exciting news and regarding your retirement. And then Pat McCauley said, that's reassuring when you live in Dungeness.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And go ahead, Jim.
And congratulations on your retirement decision. As I always say to everybody, may you be successful at staying retired. I have failed miserably, as I'm apt to say. The one aspect, and this is, this hour spent here is a good example of it. There are disasters, and then there are disasters. There are things where all the familiar things stay stable, but when the ground moves, that changes your psychology. That changes the psychology of response. So the best antidote to that, and as most everybody knows, I'm a retired Coast Guard officer. The best antidote to the psychological shock of the familiar world that just sort of disappears around you or goes up in flames or whatever it may be. The best antidote to that, the best preparedness of that is planning, thinking ahead, trying to anticipate what your business's needs are, what your individual needs are, what your employees' needs are. So that's an aspect of what you're doing and what your office will continue to do that's awfully important. We don't often think about the psychological preparedness. We think about material preparedness. That's the way we always usually think about getting ready for some bad event. But anticipating the psychological paralysis that's potentially there, when the world around you changes, I think is really an important aspect of our
That's
community.
absolutely true, Jim. There is a term that is used in alert and messaging called milling.
Yeah.
And it's what happens after an event.
Right.
And the rule of thumb is that when something happens, your first thought is, what's that? Oh, that must be just this. No, it isn't. Oh, it might be this. No, it isn't. I'm going to call my neighbor and see if they felt it. I'm going to call, and people just they have to confirm from a number of different sources. And there's a video that is one of my favorite videos of the Alaska quake. It was a 7.6 or whatever, the one that had the big collapse of the highway. And it's in a courthouse in Anchorage. And you can tell who the Alaska native is in the video, because you can see the shaking and the lamps are swinging and debris is falling. And there is one person in the courtroom who is running around and totally panicking. And then there's another one who's sitting under the desk saying, get under the desk, get under the desk, get under the desk. And it's not until a ceiling tile falls right in front of this woman, it must have brushed her nose on its way to the floor, that this woman gets under the desk. And it's like, yep, I can tell which one of these people is the Alaska native who has been through this before, who had a plan, who knows, oh, it's shaking, get under the desk. So yeah, knowing what your preparedness plan is, knowing that you have a tool is what stops that psychological effect of the disaster, because it's, oh, this is happening, I do this. And it becomes as natural to us as driving. I remember the first time I got behind of a car, the wheel of a car, and it's like, wait a minute, how do I hit that gas pedal and how do I steer? But now I do it, I drive 25 miles in and 25 miles home every day. And half of it, I do it without even consciously thinking about my actions. And that's where we would like people to have preparedness, that it becomes second nature. It just becomes what we do to stay safe, because that is what is going to help us recover faster.
Absolutely. Well, you heard it here, folks. Preparedness is the name of the game. It's the moral of the chat today. Thank you so much for joining us. And like I said, great presentation, great slides. It's very thorough. And I think we're all better off from your presentation. So thank you. With that, I think we'll call it an end to our weekly chat. But don't forget Anne's plug with the wildfires meetings coming up. And then I'd love to partner with you down the line to set up one of those. Was the toolkit meeting or business?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Continuity of operations planning. We can bring
That's
in
what it was.
a FEMA instructor and make that happen if we get enough response for it.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. And everybody enjoy their day. Thanks again, Anne.
Thank you.